whole of the country is at risk from liver fluke this year because it was such a wet year last year. A lot of sheep farms will have had issues with liver fluke in the past. It is important, especially where the sheep are still outside. We've had a very mild winter. Grass growth has been quite good. That's also good for the parasites and for the little mud snail. They're actively picking up and have been actively picking up infection over the winter and the grazing season. So look at if we're treating sheep that are outside, continuously grazing, continuously picking up infection for liver fluke, it's very important that we use a product that is effective against immature fluke, not the products that are only effective against the mature fluke,
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. This week's episode, we're joined by sheep specialist Michael Gottstein to discuss some timely advice for hill flocks in the run-up to lambing. Michael discusses some key areas to focus on this spring, highlighting how yoke condition is a challenge. We discuss the basics of nutrition, some of the feeding strategies that might be employed, and we finish up discussing some of the health areas that require attention in the lead up to lambing. We hear first from Michael.
Look, I suppose a lot of hill flocks are a good bit away, but I suppose close enough as well for it to start getting serious in terms of looking out for the ewes, I suppose. Look at the issue I suppose that we're seeing is ewes were a little bit thinner last year going to the ram. I think we're seeing that across the board where we're monitoring. Anecdotally, I think the scans are up a little bit, so maybe ewes did quite well while they were with the ram. But I suppose look at the thin ewes are still thin, and what we're seeing on the Better Farm program is that the flocks that had a higher percentage of thin ewes, that the number of thin ewes generally increases as they get closer to lambing down. And that's a challenge because ewes that lose a lot of body condition in late pregnancy or are thin starting out and aren't able to put it on in mid-pregnancy. Ewes won't put on body condition in late pregnancy in general. And no matter what you do with those ewes after lambing down, they're not able to milk. Whatever feed they get, they put into body condition. Ewes generally need body condition to mobilise in early lactation to be able to milk to their full potential and drive on that lamb growth rate. And if they're thin, they can't do that. So it's a compromise. I suppose they compromise the lamb performance. So I suppose that's one of the big things, Kieran, I suppose people to watch out for is those thin ewes.
Right, I suppose you just put that in context. Most of them flocks are kind of 4 to 5 weeks out at this stage, maybe a bit more from the start of lambing, depending on where they are in the country. Look, there's going to be some variation in it. Some of them will have scanned the thin ewes there. There's still time to do a little bit of intervention there in terms of what we're feeding them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose you mentioned it there. A lot of them have scanned, and hopefully, if you never scanned ewes before, this year is the year to scan ewes. And it's not so much to identify the singles and the twins. That's what we're generally talking about in the hill ewes. Most of the ewes will have singles. There'll be some handful of twins or couples, as people call them. I suppose it's to pick out the dries. No point in feeding dry ewes, especially if there's a high percentage of them there. We've seen some flocks there with, 25, even 30%. Maybe if there was a ram went wrong or something like that of the ewes dry. No point in hammering feed into them at the price at which it's at when there's nothing going to come out of them. So if you never scanned ewes, I suppose this year it's about identifying the empties, scan them, identify the empties, pull them off, and concentrate the feed then on the ones that are in lamb. And I suppose it's not too late insofar as that we can prevent ewes from losing more body condition in the run-up to lambing. So there's two things. There's a thin ewe, and fair enough, there probably isn't an awful lot we can do with her in terms of getting her to put on a lot of condition, but we certainly can stop her from losing more condition. And that's, I suppose, where the game is at this stage for most people. It's going through the ewes. If you've scanned the ewes, and you have thin ewes, in particular, if you have twin-bearing ewes that are thin, they need, intervention and significant amounts of feed to stop them from disimproving further. And I think that's where people should be concentrating now at this stage.
So if we're at that end of it, and look, some will have introduced feed at this stage, maybe to the twin ewes or brought them down. Maybe practically, what can we do feeding-wise in the hill flock?
Yeah, so I suppose, look at the hill flocks are a very variable group of farms because you have varying degrees of green land, I suppose, to manage the ewes on. So we would see hill flocks that have a huge amount of green ground, And even some flocks that possibly could keep the ewes down most of the year, they have so much green ground. And then you have the exact opposite of that. You have flocks where they have virtually no green ground, virtually very little, and all the bit of green ground is needed, will be needed just for ewes at lambing time, and to keep them going as long as they can before they have to bang them back up onto the hill. Um, so look at I suppose it depends on where people are at. Ideally, and I mean this is look where people have scanned maybe in February, some of the hill flocks there, they'll have kept the thin yaws and the twin yaws down. And that'd be the optimum thing. And then it's really about feeding them at that stage then, and what we're going to feed them and how we're going to feed them. And in particular, I suppose as well, Kieran, we probably need to mention the organic farms that are out there. A lot of farmers gone organic in the hill areas, and an awful lot of very poor quality organic rations out there for big money, huge money, and very poor ingredient structures in them. So it's don't just buy what's available in the local co-op shop, or the local merchant, because it's handy and it comes in a bag and it's €900 a ton. Have a look at the ingredients, and if it doesn't stack up, there are cheaper, really good quality cereal based rations out there being made in Ireland by farmers, by organic tillage farmers, probably selling for somewhere between 650 and 750 a ton. Now that's generally in bulk. But there are people, I'd say, that are bagging that as well. And it's a much, much, much superior ration. So I suppose look at in terms of feeding them, Kieran, I suppose there's two things. If they're coming down and there's grass, they're fine. And supplemented with a bit of meal, and ideally that concentrate feed should contain mostly cereals, and the protein source should be mostly coming from soybean meal. Um, if they're going into a shed, and in some cases hill sheep, in particular the twins, might be coming in and being housed for a period of time, then it's hay or silage or haylage, and concentrates. And look at the again, the ingredients of the concentrate there are important. Having access to the forage, whether it's inside or outside, making sure that the ewes can get to the forage. Sometimes we see sheep and they've nosed it all into the middle of our own feeder, and it's like a kebab inside the kebab shop. They can't get at it. Or at a barrier situation, they can't get at it. They've pushed it out. So having access to it as well is very important. And I suppose the challenge outside, trying to keep it clean, keep those bell feeders or round feeders moved, like, because they get very messy around them, and that dirt and stuff reduces intake, and soils a lot of the forage and that type of thing. Like, so that's I suppose for people who are in a position to bring them down and to manage them below, I suppose that's what we're talking about, trying to manage the forage to maximize intake. So that means access and keeping it clean. And trying to have a good ration. So a ration that is predominantly cereal based. So what we'll be talking about generally there is barley, maize, wheat, oats. The pulps are quite good as well, beet pulp and citrus pulp. Things like distillers and soybean have high energy as well, and soybean would be the product of choice there in terms of driving bee stings and colostrum quality. And that's very important, especially when you're lambing outside, because it's very important that the colostrum quality is there and that the lambs get a good suck, because farmers won't be around there to be dipping navels and doing things like that when the ewes are lambing outside, So very important that the colostrum is good.
Michael, just maybe for those at the singles or maybe rougher ground or aren't brought in terms of providing some supplement to them in the couple of weeks leading into lambing, what do they need and how would we go about doing that?
Yeah, lots of people out there, Kieran, that are feeding sheep on kind of lower hill ground or parks, or rough ground at the bottom of the hill, or even maybe people feeding them out on the hill even. And look, I suppose there's a number of options there. If you can feed them in troughs, obviously, then your standard no-throw ration is the cheapest solution. And again, moving those troughs and keeping clean around them is quite important. If you can feed in troughs, like then something like a cob would be useful in terms of if you're feeding it on the ground. They'd probably end up picking up most of those. If you're feeding your standard kind of 6 mil nut, Quite a few of them will get trampled into the ground during the wet conditions, and there'll be significant losses there. And anyone that ever feeds sheep with a snacker like that loose on the ground, look back and you'll see an awful lot of crows when the sheep are gone, and those lads aren't there for nothing. A farmer said to me one time in Westport, he said, them boys aren't there for nothing, and he's right. The reason why they're there is because there's a lot of ration buried inside the ground, and they're digging it out. Then there's the option of the buckets, Kieran. So there's a number of different feed buckets out there. Again, there's organic feed buckets and there's conventional feed buckets. Important if you're buying feed buckets and if you're an organic farmer, that you make sure that those buckets are approved by your approval body. Okay, so that whichever body that you're affiliated to, that the buckets are approved by them, and generally that's down to the molasses and the source of the energy of their soya in them. Sometimes the soya has to be non-GM, and the molasses has to come from non-GM sugarcane or sugar beet. So important that you check that out. We don't want to run into trouble with a compliance issue and be paying back money. The buckets, I suppose, Kieran, while they are convenient, they're obviously very limited in the amount that the sheep are going to eat. So you're probably talking about fractions, like, kind of, 50, 100, 150, 200 grams a day at very most. So we're not going to get big quantities in there. But I suppose what they do, and particularly if they have energy and protein in them, Kieran, is that they improve the digestibility of the forage. So if the sheep are out there eating rough grasses, generally what's limiting in that situation would be energy and protein for the bugs to break down those grasses and to digest them for the sheep. And if you put extra energy and protein into the rumen, the bugs are able to multiply better and break it down better, and the sheep get more from, not only just from what they're getting purely out of the bucket, but also they get more from the forage that they're eating. I suppose the downside of the bucket is that it's generally 3 to 4 times the price, I suppose, or 3 times the price anyway of the ration of an ordinary concentrate feed. So you are paying significantly for the convenience associated with it. But for some farmers, I suppose, look, it's possibly the only option, in particular where maybe it's a big trek up to the hill and they're not getting up there every day, and they put out some of these buckets and the sheep will lick from them. Look, at the big challenge, I suppose, that we do see with those leak buckets as well is you have wildlife interfering with them possibly, and the other side of it as well is they could be reservoirs for spreading diseases like OPA, so wheelbarrow's disease or Yaxete, and we're seeing more and more of that in sheep. So that's a kind of a sheep going down with incurable pneumonia, pining away and dying, and their lungs are filled with fluid. And if they're licking buckets, they're invariably drooling into those, and they're infecting any other sheep that come to the bucket. So look, for flocks that know that they have OPA, those buckets are probably not a great idea,
Sounds as well. Look, if I brought you back to the start of that, probably the one key thing we do need to pay more attention. I brought this up several times this year on the podcast, but condition is challenging this year, Mike. It's been a risky season for fluke and other things. Given the fact we're still 5 weeks out, there is just time to make a go in, handle that flock again, make sure your treatment's up to date prior to lamb, and getting them problems sorted at this stage is going to reduce a lot of the headaches we're going to see in April.
Yeah, so body condition is one, I suppose, and you've touched on the other things. Then there's, it's probably time for a lot of the flocks to be vaccinating. We're getting ready for vaccinating for Clostridial and in addition, I suppose, then look, liver fluke. If we look at the liver fluke forecast, the whole of the country is at risk from liver fluke this year because it was such a wet year last year. So look at flocks where liver fluke is prevalent, and look at on sheep farms. A lot of sheep farms will have had issues with liver fluke in the past. It is important, especially where the sheep are still outside. We've had a very mild winter. Grass growth has been quite good. That's also good for the parasites and for the little mud snail. And they're actively picking up and have been actively picking up infection over the winter and the grazing season. So look at, if we're treating sheep that are outside, continuously grazing, continuously picking up infection for liver fluke, it's very important that we use a product that is effective against immature fluke, not the products that are only effective against the mature fluke, and the reason for that is that it takes fluke about 3 months to mature. So if you use a product like albendazole-based product or an oxyclosinide-based product, um, they're not going to kill any fluke that the sheep have picked up in the last 3 months. They're only killing what the sheep picked up before that. So really, we'd be talking about your closantel-based products. Those are your like the likes of your fluke ivers and your silantils and those type of products. Your rifoxanide-based products, your ridiflukes and ranide and a few of those. Some of these are in combination drenches. Again, we wouldn't really be advocating the use of a wormer and flukicide for ewes, but maybe for lambs, you could be using those. Your triclobendazole, so those are your all Fastnex or Tribex or Endoflux, those type of products. The new version of Trodax as well, the nitroxanil-based product, I think it's called Fasinox. That's also a product that's effective against the immature fluke. So they're really where we should be aiming if we're going treating ewes for fluke, if we feel that fluke is something that is prevalent on the farm this year. So yeah, I suppose they're the couple of health issues. The fluke, the vaccination for disease, body condition, as you said, Kieran, is the really big thing. That's the big proxy that people really should be paying more attention to and managing those thinner ewes. And then look at lastly, and not probably a big problem for sheep coming down off the hill, but certainly a problem maybe for some of the sheep that are down the lowland, lameness. Lameness is a huge issue on sheep farms, and lame sheep will not thrive. They can't fight for feed. They're losing weight. Get on top of the lameness. For a lot of people, if you have ewes that are very lame, you're talking about an injection with an antibiotic, and you need to talk to your vet about that. It's about identifying what's causing the problem. Foot batting them sheep is not going to work if they can't put their foot in the ground. Foot batting is really only effective, I suppose, if you get in there early, when the first couple of sheep are starting to show lameness. But very often, at this stage, we're seeing sheep where, a significant number of sheep are lame on the farm. And at that stage, it's about talking to the vet about what needs to happen there to get on top of that before we get closer to lambing.
And put that in context, when they start to be brought together for feeding and maybe in more confined areas, that's going to spread quicker too.
Absolutely. So, one lame sheep today is probably 3 or 4 lame sheep in a week's time, and in 3 or 4 weeks' time, it's 30 or 40 lame sheep. And if you treat that one lame sheep today, well, hopefully you'll avoid, that situation. And it's much easier to keep on top of that then if the numbers are low,
Michael, good having you on today. Look, thanks for that update.
No bother.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. Some timely advice from Michael there, particularly paying attention to those health issues, looking at condition. It's an issue right across the country. So I think it's just something that needs to be addressed and something we need to work on for the rest of the year. That's it for me for this episode. For updates from the sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more episodes.